Welcome to Gallup's Great Manager webcast, recorded live from the Gallup campus in Omaha, Nebraska on September 9th, 2014. My name is Scott Wright, and I'm here as the producer for today's show. If you ask questions for our guests today, or if you have contributions or comments, we have a live chat room available right below the video window that you are watching now. If you are watching a recorded version of this webcast and have questions or comments, please contact us by email at live@gallup.com. Again, that email address is live@gallup.com. And don't forget to visit Gallup's Employee Engagement Center at q12.gallup.com for all your employee engagement resources and manager training information. Hosting today's show is Dr. Brian Brim. Dr. Brim is a senior practice consultant who has worked as a consultant, speaker, and advisor to some of the world's leading organizations in the 25 years he has been with Gallup. Dr. Brim has also authored and co-authored many articles for the Gallup Business Journal, has contributed to many of Gallup's best-selling books, and is also the co-author of Strengths-Based Selling. And today's guest is Dr. Jim Harter. Dr. Harter is Gallup's chief scientist for workplace management and well-being. Since joining Gallup in 1985, Dr. Harter has authored or co-authored more than 1,000 research studies, many of which have appeared in best-selling management books and research publications. He is co-author of the book 12, The Elements of Great Managing, and of the book Wellbeing, The 5 Essential Elements. Brian and Jim, thanks for joining the show today.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
You bet. Brian, why don't you get us kicked off today?
Sounds great. Thank you, Scott. Well, welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have Dr. Harter with us today. I will let you know that I've known Dr. Harter for quite some time, so I'll be referring to him as Jim in our conversation throughout the webcast today. Again, our topic, once again, in our time today is all about great management. And we've had the opportunity within the Gallup organization to do a tremendous amount of research in this area. And it just so happens that Jim is one of our leading researchers in this area. So it's very exciting to have him here today. As I've said before in the opening of our broadcasts, when we think about high-performance management, it really is a synergistic relationship between strengths-based focus, so thinking about what people show up as every day, the best, how to maximize or minimize the best in people through engagement, and then ultimately the outcome is sustainable performance. And so Jim has spent his entire career at Gallup thinking about those core elements, and so we're very excited today to dig into those elements with Dr. Harter. So to get us kicked off, I'm just going to jump right in with some questions and let Jim lead us through some deeper discussion around these topics. Jim, would love to start by just saying good morning, good evening, good afternoon, dependent on where people are joining us from around the world, and I'm really glad you're here with us today.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be with you as well. And hello, everybody. Look forward to the discussion.
So, Jim, just to get us started off, can you explain to us what got Gallup so interested in this area of research around managers?
Yeah, so historically, Gallup has been involved in studying successful individuals in all walks of life for decades. You can take it back 40 years through the work that was started with Don Clifton to the work of George Gallup in studying successful individuals in all walks of life throughout the world. And that includes great managers, but we also have historically studied great organizations, and we went about it by really asking the question, what makes a great organization? What makes a successful organization over time? And we define success by performance, the traditional performance measures that a lot of people are interested in their organizations, whether it's retaining employees to profit, to revenue, to producing quality work and having customers continually return and having an engaged group of customers. And as we're doing that work and we launched that investigation, we stumbled across something pretty interesting to us. And that was that when we dug into organizations and really looked at the variability across teams and organizations, we found that there was massive variability and massive differences in the levels of we call it engagement now, but how people perceive their work environment back then. We just asked people questions about their overall work environment, and we saw some pretty massive differences within any organization, even high brand organizations, the organizations you might traditionally think are, have the best brands in the world. And when we dug a little deeper, we found that variation across these teams was related back to what managers do on a regular basis, back to that manager and a lot of elements that manager has a lot of influence on. So we found at that time there almost seemed to be as many cultures as there are managers in organizations, even well-regarded organizations. And across industries, we just kept seeing this consistently over time. And that led us to dig even deeper into what are the elements of a great workplace that managers can do something about and influence, and then also, who are they as individuals? What are their talents, and what leads them to success from an innate kind of talent perspective. So both of those two avenues we went down, and I think we learned quite a bit over the last few decades on that.
That's fantastic. It really makes it clear to me how critically important the role of manager is. And obviously it's a centerpiece for building great organizations. So the way we treat managers, the way we develop managers, is an incredibly important topic for all organizations to be taking into account. What do you think, I don't want to go negative real quickly here, but what do you think are the main mistakes organizations make when it comes to the way in which they, for lack of a better word, manage managers? So when you think about how they develop and promote people into management, what are some of the main mistakes you see organizations making in that regard?
I think there have been some that have been pretty monumental in how they've affected how organizations have progressed over time or not, and they've just been overlooked. And I guess I'd summarize it with one word, and it's over-prescription. And what I mean by that is that organizations haven't done a great job historically at separating what an individual can change individually, the things they can change and do something about, from their talents, or the things they're less likely to change, their natural capacity for excellence. And from a developmental perspective, it's really important, we found, to separate those things out into one category of things that every manager can do something about and influence, like clarity of expectations and getting people what they need to do their work, developing individuals, versus natural talents that have more to do with what's innate in each of us that we then need to leverage and do something about. There are too many programs out there right now that combine those things together and expect everybody to be everything. And I think the best programs separate those things pretty effectively, and I think it's been overlooked. Hiring the right managers to begin with, but just how we develop and train managers and what we expect of them and their roles, I think has been overlooked.
You made me think of a lot of the feedback I get from client organizations that talk about the big mistakes they make when they automatically think the highest performer in a particular role will make the best, highest individual performer in a particular role will make the best manager in that role. Can you speak to a little bit about what you've seen in that area?
Yeah, and we've asked people, managers, how they got into the role of management, and you won't be too surprised by these answers. The top two, one of them was related to success in a prior role and related to management, and the other was tenure in the organization. Those sound like very equitable reasons to promote someone into the role of management. But as it turns out, we all vary in terms of our managerial talents, and the best organizations think about who the people are in those positions where they're successful in the past, whether it's a salesperson, an accountant, a researcher, whatever it might be. They then fit into that role of management over the long haul, and in many cases organizations have overlooked that, just the core essence of what managerial talent is, and what makes people successful in that role from an innate perspective. And so I think that's been overlooked, Brian. I really do, and it shows up in the data. It's consistent with what people say in terms of how they got into those positions, and then when you look at that natural capacity for excellence when in the role, we all vary. Many of us are in kind of a moderate range, and we can continue to improve with the right coaching and training. But there's some that just shouldn't be in that role. And if you've had multiple managers, you know who those are.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people nodding their heads out there right now. And it's interesting because that's a very that's a big topic, because organizations oftentimes create a system in which the only way for people to feel like they can excel is through promotion to management. And so for those of you listening out there today, it's probably very important to realize that in order to truly honor the natural talent of people, getting the right people into those roles, we have to be very aware of whether or not we're creating that type of pinch point in our organization that is creating a lack of promotion or a lack of growth, the sense of growth on people, in people's minds, because we aren't creating multiple ways for people to feel that way beyond just being promoted into management. So as we think about this, and if you had to narrow down all of the research that Gallup has done in this area of just management, because obviously we've done a lot of research in other areas, what would be, say, the top three? Let's just say three. You can go more if you'd like, but what would be the top three findings that you would point out that have come out of this work around our research around managers?
Well, in terms of what people can, what managers can change and what they can do something about in the work environment, we found in the late 90s, after doing a lot of research and looking at a lot of organizations and accumulating data on over 1 million employees, database has now grown to 27 million employees. We found that there are 12 specific elements that great managers manage toward to engage workers and thereby improve performance in organization. And so that's one of them, is that there are 12 that every manager can do something about with their team to affect how engaged that team is, and at the same time improve performance. It's important to think about those two in tandem, engagement and performance. The second is that about 70% of engagement can be explained by the quality of management. And when I say the quality of management, I'm referring to how the employees perceive the manager and what they do from a behavioral standpoint. I'm referring to how engaged that manager is themselves, and I'm referring to the natural innate talents of the manager. Those three things combined account for about 70% of the variance in employee engagement across teams, and so that's how much managers matter. The third that I think is also critically important and kind of it's embedded in the 12 elements, but important to call out separately, and it's that we all have different talents. We're all wired differently, and great managers appeal to those innate differences. They understand who each person is on their team, and rather than sitting there in a room, which we've all done, sit across the table from a group of people and wonder why they're not more like us, to think about the fact that, well, they aren't like us, and that's good, because they bring something that we don't bring, and we can leverage those innate talents, and great managers do that as well. So those are three of them. We've had a lot of them over the years, but those are three I'd point to as three of the central ones.
Nice, very succinct. The thing that you reinforced several times in that last statement was around the relationship between engagement and performance. I think it's fascinating when oftentimes you may have a manager who everybody loves, but doesn't necessarily create an environment of performance. Talk to me a little bit about what you've seen in that regard, as far as that, what I would call almost that magic balance between having an engaged workforce, but having one that feels good about accountability and loves to bring that discretionary effort to work.
Yeah, and engagement is really about more than, a lot of people, you'll see in the press sometimes people will refer to some studies, even some of ours, as employee happiness. It's not really what it is. And engagement is much more than just feeling good about where you're at. It's really about having some clarity in terms of what your role is on the team, some role. It's about having your basic needs met. Do I have what I need to do my work? It's about being able to develop individually and making a contribution individually, feeling like I'm contributing to the team. It's about a sense of belonging, feeling like I'm connected to the larger organization and what it's about, and also feeling like I'm connected to my coworkers in a meaningful way, and so that we can have those informal discussions that actually lead to better work-related discussions. Even some of the discussions unrelated to work, still can boost performance in the longer term. And then it's also about positioning people so they have a chance to grow and progress over time, and so that they get feedback about their growth and their progress over time. So it's much more than just feeling good. And the things I just mentioned all relate empirically to performance outcomes that organizations are interested in, like safety, accidents on the job, a lot fewer accidents on the job, better retention of workers, whether people on the team are pleasing customers or not, getting them engaged in the organization that they're serving, that's serving them, and then productivity, quality of work. All these things add up to about a 22% difference in profitability. Those teams that are at the top quartile on engagement versus the bottom quartile. So I think of engagement as it's kind of the nexus between attitudes at work, what the attitudes people bring to work, and the performance outcomes that organizations are interested in.
Yeah, and it sounds like the role of manager is how to really create the energy around that nexus, if you will. So that's I really like that example. We keep talking about engagement. Let's just talk about those 12 elements. Just tell me a little bit more about that. A lot of people, we talk about them all the time. We work with them all the time, but a lot of people may not be as familiar with the 12 elements of great management and why you think they're so useful to managers.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally when you get to the 12 elements, and they speak to human nature in the workplace. And we've existed for a lot longer than the modern day workplace as humans has, but there's elements of human nature that are still important to us when we come to work. We still need to know what our role is. We need to have our tools. Man has always needed tools, right? And we get pretty emotional when we don't have the tools that we need, ironically, but it's a very tangible thing, but yet we get emotional about it. We need a chance to use our talents effectively and do what we do best on a regular basis. When we do good work, we have a built-in need to be recognized for it, and continuously. Not just once in a while, but every time we do good work, we want somebody to notice it. But people need recognition in different ways, and so great managers, of course, appeal to that in different ways depending on the individual. And most people that will come to me and say, I don't really need recognition. If you get under the hood a little bit, you find out that they need it. They just need it in a way that's unique or different from a way they've heard that recognition is for other people. So. And that relates back to feeling cared about and feeling that somebody encourages your development over time. They seem like soft issues on the surface, but again, related back to human nature. And I think that's why, Brian, that these elements that we've found, these 12, have endured for so long. Is that they we had a huge database when we found them, about 1 million, and we have 27 times that now. But they keep working despite huge changes in the economy. Huge changes in technology. They continue to predict performance, and I think the reason is, again, they relate back to human needs in the workplace, and they're kind of timeless from that perspective. But those 6 that I just kind of listed off there for you, I would call those the basic kind of foundational elements that most organizations kind of overlook, that you have to get right first, that we have to help managers put tools in managers' hands so they can get those basics right, so that the other elements matter more, and so that everything the organization is trying to get done matters even more. So to give you an example, I could feel really connected to my coworkers at work, feel I have a best friend at work, for instance. But if I don't feel I have my basic needs met, I don't know what's expected of me, I don't have a chance to do what I do best, I don't get recognition for good work, etc. You can kind of imagine that scenario. It's a situation where my best friend at work might just be a gripe session, right? But if I've got those basics in place, then what happens is it takes on a different dynamic. Those informal conversations become innovative. They become they're really more about how we can help the organization improve. And so these elements aren't really independent, they're really interdependent, and they play off of one another, and there's a context around each of them. And so I think it's important to think about them as interrelated, really. That's
great, really great overview. You mentioned the what I do best item, and the need to be recognized for doing great work. You also mentioned the need for managers to really zero in on individuals, to understand the uniqueness the uniqueness that we bring and that the unique needs that we have. That really ties right into the strengths-based conversations that we often have, and there's something going on that continues to build around that strengths movement. I mean, we've had over 10 million people around the world that have taken Clifton Strengths Finder. Why do you think people are so drawn to this approach, the strengths-based approach, and why do you think that matters in regard to being a great manager?
Well, I think people are drawn to it. To answer your first question, is because we are all individually unique, and it puts some accurate language, science-based accurate language around the ways in which we're each unique. And so we can understand the person across the table from us better. We can understand ourselves a little bit better, and we can leverage each other's strengths to just be better as teams and as individuals. And so that language, that common language, allows us to talk to one another in a way that has meaning, as opposed to, again, thinking about the fact that sometimes we wish other people ought to be more like us. It can kind of put some objectivity around that for us, and it brings objectivity through the science. But the practical use of it is that managers can also use the information to more efficiently do what they do best, the great managers, and that's appeal to the differences of individuals. When they're designing jobs, two jobs that might be identical by job description could get done a little differently depending on how each person's strengths play out, and attempt to play to each of those individual strengths. And so great managers make adjustments to jobs, even the same jobs, depending on the individual, and help them partner with the right people based on areas they're not so strong in. And so I think our research shows it helps managers just be more efficient. It's more of a downhill than an uphill run, and and management is always difficult. So why not make it easier? It's a difficult job. It's a job that requires a lot of imagine a lot of messy people. Why not make it easier by understanding who each person is from the get-go? And the managers that utilize a strengths-based approach see significant differences, not only in the overall engagement of their teams, but also in that kind of growth trajectory that we're trying to help them achieve over time. So I guess I'd chalk it up to efficiency.
That's great, and it's so interesting because you connected a few dots for me just there, and it made me think about a manager who talked about the relationship between strengths, and then you were mentioning individualized recognition and how through strengths-based conversations could really dial in on the way to recognize people, that some people really wanted their work to matter, so he would even talk about the difference that they made because of their work, and other people it was really less about the big splash, and it was more about being seen as a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert. So he'd always make sure that he sought out their opinion and that was their form of recognition. So I think that's a great example of how it just helped him be more efficient in the manner in which he engaged other people that he led. So great information there. So
we had a manager, Brian, at Stryker, we interviewed several years ago. I'll just read you a quote from him in terms of how he managed a group of engineers. They actually manufactured hip replacement devices, surgery devices. His approach, he said, we do one-on-ones with our employees very often, every 2 or 3 months at least. And those we ask them, what do you do best? What do you really like best about your job? We try to help people understand themselves. What they describe they do best is really what gets exactly to the role we want them in.
That's fantastic.
To continue.
Yeah, what a great example. Yeah, and I think that's a really great point to make, is that management doesn't happen in one meeting a year kind of thing. It's a continuous process. I think that's an absolutely essential. And here's the other thing that I found in my own work is that people keep discovering more about how to apply their strengths, and they keep discovering more about how their strengths interconnect and how they're dynamic. So that's great information, Jim. Okay, let me let's go big picture just for a second here. We've been really tactical. what impact, when you think about all the different work that we do here at Gallup, but think specifically about managers for a second, what impact do you think a focus on hiring and developing great managers could have on the world?
I love that question. You can look at it from two different angles. One of them is financial. What kind of financial impact do great managers have, and the other has more to do with the lives of the people that are being managed, both equally important. On the financial end, if you add together the hiring and the development and the engagement of the managers and their teams, our research would suggest that over 50% improvement potential just in those three activities as related to revenue per person. For the average organization we've studied. And so there's a lot of upside. That's one side of it from a revenue standpoint. On earnings per share at the company level, those organizations in the top decile, top 10% of our database, 147% higher earnings per share than their competition. Disengagement in the U.S. alone is worth about, active disengagement is worth about $500 billion in lost productivity. That's on the other end of the continuum, what poor management is probably costing us. Now, in terms of the overall levels of engagement in the U.S., they're still not high enough. It's only 30% in the U.S. are engaged, 13% worldwide, based on our world poll, are engaged in their work. But my point is, it doesn't have to be that way. It's we work with organizations that have moved that needle, and many of which have gotten to the 60 to 70%, so doubled that 30% number over time. We need to work with a lot more organizations to move those overall numbers on. That will then hopefully have some implications on the economy at large. But so think about 60 to 70% with a goal to get to 80% engaged. That's a realistic goal for an organization to have, and one that can be achieved. So my point is, those macro numbers, 30%, 13% worldwide, don't have to be that way. And great managers are the critical conduit to getting that done. Probably, I would argue, one of the most important jobs in the world. The other side of it, improving lives. Managers improve people's days, and those days add up. We have been tracking the mood of Americans for quite some time, and have done it worldwide as well. But we've got this, 1,000 people a day we've been tracking in the U.S., and we look at the mood swings in the U.S., and it kind of goes like this. And you look under the hood to see what's causing those ups and downs. And the first top line result is weekends and holidays are the highs, and weekdays are the lows. So we could stop right there and just say everybody needs more holidays and weekends, right? And their well-being would be higher. But of course, there's some causal elements underneath that. When you look a little deeper, you find that people that are engaged in their work, that do have great managers, that drop-off from Sunday to Monday is only about half as much. So it shrinks considerably. Now, coming to work does bring more stress. We all know that. There's unexpected things that happen. But what happens is that great managers produce an environment where the bad stress is less, and it has implications on a lot of other things. Like we've done studies where we've tracked people in the moment and captured saliva samples in the moment. I know that sounds kind of disgusting, but it allows us to measure their cortisol, the stress hormone, and we found that managers that or workplaces that have let me rephrase that. Individuals who have higher levels of engagement versus disengagement, they have lower levels of cortisol on weekdays, and those that are disengaged have higher levels of cortisol on weekdays. But those differences go away on weekends. So it's really a function of what they're experiencing on the job. Now you think about how those days continually add up. Those weekday differences continually add up, and great managers over time, while many of them may not even realize it, can have have big implications and impact on health. We've looked at sick days. We've looked at triglyceride levels in blood samples. We've looked at it from a lot of different angles, and great managers. I don't think I'm overstating this in saying that a great manager might be as important as your doctor. Because of those continuous experiences people have throughout the day. Well-being is 3 times higher globally for engaged workers versus disengaged workers. And great managers have an impact on how we view all sorts of things, from our vacation time to the number of hours we work, to our commute to and from work. Excuse me. Managers who, individuals who have longer commutes tend to have a lower well-being, but if they have a great manager and an engaging workplace, that effect on the long commute washes away. And so there are a lot of far-reaching implications beyond just the performance ones that seem obvious from the research. I guess that's my general point.
That's amazingly powerful. It's mind-blowing when you think about the impact that could have on the health of the world alone, just the health of the world, and let alone think about the impact the job creation that great managers can have by helping organizations be more successful, more powerful, able to create more jobs for more people. It's just mind-blowing. Are you getting a cold? Do you need a different manager there, Jim, or is that just...
Talk about health got me choked up a little bit, I guess.
So let's think. I started out by talking early in our conversation about the main mistake that organizations make. Let's think about the positive point here. What's your favorite story about a great manager and the impact they've had? I know you've had a chance to interview hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of managers over the years. Is there one that comes to mind about just a great story of impact?
Well, there's a lot of them, as you might imagine, that are pretty dramatic kind of turnaround stories that, everybody kind of points to the turnaround stories where somebody completely turned around a department and their performance, and those are all really well documented and good stories. I kind of tend to gravitate more toward the everyday ones. They're maybe a little less dramatic, but more. But one of them that comes to mind is a manager that we interviewed at Mars, Philippe Lescornier. He manages remote workers, young remote workers, sales promoters, and he's managed, at the time we talked with him and his co-workers or his employees, he had managed about 125 sales promoters. And it was kind of interesting because he made a really important point regarding performance appraisals. He said, when I get to the performance appraisal, the person that I'm managing shouldn't be surprised by what I say in that meeting. That should be a continuous process. So every day he was challenging people, bringing in invigorating discussions in with each person on his team at least once a week, and really improving each person's profile in the organization. 60% of them were promoted.
Wow.
But he still had low turnover. And
wow.
He's the person everybody said they wanted to work for. So you think about building a brand as a manager. He did it from the perspective of improving lives while he was improving performance and setting people up for success continually, giving them some freedom along with a lot of accountability. Always checking in on them.
Yeah, I've often said that it's all about focused frequent, because time and time again I've heard what you've said from great managers, that they talk about that it's part of the day-to-day interaction, that we have to have these conversations oftentimes daily. Even what's fascinating, you were talking about them being remote workers. So people often say, well, how can I have that same kind of meaningful relationship? How can I engage in the same way as a manager sees their people every day? And it happens constantly. We have people who manage remote workers who do just an amazing job. So I think that's a fantastic example that you just gave there. We've covered a lot of ground today. If you were thinking about just one piece of advice that you would want to give to all of our managers out there that are listening today, or people who are hiring managers, developing managers, what would that piece of advice be?
It's a good question. I think about a quote that another manager gave us, and he said, "These are people's lives. I have an obligation. I can't make mistakes with that." His name's Pete Wamsteker. He said, "I really have an obligation to do it right, and I'm going to invest the time to do it right." So I would say the best advice I could give a manager is that think about improving lives while you're improving performance. It's not one or the other. It's not just improving lives. It's not just improving performance. If you do those two things together, you'll do really well. And that's probably the best advice I could give. All the other things we've talked about are kind of embedded in that, but that's how I would just summarize it.
That's a fantastic way to summarize it. It's on one of our earlier calls we talked about the power of sending people better home at night. So they could go. They've already made a great difference during the day. They've been able to apply their strengths. They've been able to engage as part of that application of their strengths. They've been able to make their work environment better because they're increasing performance. They're also engaging the people around them, and to actually get done with a full day like that and then be able to go home feeling even better oftentimes than when you showed up that day is just an incredible flywheel effect that we can create. And obviously great managers are an absolutely critical part to all of that. Is there anything, I often use this as a final question that's a little bit of a catch-all, but is there anything that you thought I would ask you in this conversation today about great management that I didn't? Just want to make sure I've touched some of the major bases that we need to touch in this important topic.
Well, there's this issue that comes up sometimes around accountability, and how do managers hold people accountable, and how does that work for or against engaging them in the first place? And we did some research on that recently and asked it from a lot of different perspectives. Not only how often do great managers tend to engage employees, how often do they tend to interact with their employees, what do they expect of them, what do their employees say about what their managers do. And it's kind of interesting. We kind of read off to you a few of the things we found here. Managers who help people set work priorities have higher levels of engagement, substantially higher engagement than those who don't. That relates to the clarity of expectations one. Also, managers who employees say hold them accountable for their performance have significantly higher levels of engagement. So it isn't lower, it's actually higher. Employees want to be held accountable. If the ones that don't, of course, are going to be the ones you probably didn't want to hire in the first place. But average employee who's engaged will tell you they want to be held accountable, and so that's kind of interesting. And the manager also helps them set performance goals on a regular basis, those that are highly engaged. With regard to how often they communicate, I was kind of surprised at the frequency. It seems like the more you ramp up the frequency, the better it is. Now, we'd argue at least once a week, but the managers who are engaging their employees are in continuous communication with them, almost. Not overbearingly, not in a way that is unnecessary, but like the example I gave of Philippe Lescornier from Mars, he kept in touch on a regular basis and did it in a way that didn't feel too overly intrusive, but did it in a way that motivated and challenged people to keep doing better. So they knew how they were doing. They weren't, when it came to the performance appraisal, they weren't surprised by it. I think accountability can get a bad word when it's and performance appraisals also when they're just a once a year or twice a year event, as opposed to being a time to actually, he thought about it as a time to develop people for the future, to think about their future as opposed to just recording what they've done in the past. So those are a couple things that kind of stick out, but I think we've touched on a lot.
That's really good, Jim. It's so interesting you say that, because one of the things we ask people around the world in a variety of forums is explain they expected something out of me, and I think you're describing that really well through the form of accountability. So excellent. Well, I want to make sure that we don't leave the listeners out of this, the listeners and watchers out there out of this conversation. So I'm going to ask our friend Scott if we have a question or two that we have some time to address as well.
We actually do, Brian. Thank you. We have a very popular question that quite a few of our viewers have been asking, and we're going to use the wording that Jennifer Loomis used here. The evidence and statistics clearly show that great managers make all the difference in the world and can help improve a company in just about every way. But how do you help companies understand how they need to invest in and develop the best managers, and how do you convince them that if they're not completely sold on the idea or the belief that employees employee engagement is linked to higher return on investment?
If they don't believe that, or if they do?
If they don't believe that.
Okay. So, part of it, all of this in terms of how it's activated really does start with leadership and strategy, and so I can kind of speak to what organizations have done that have achieved growth over time and some of the themes that we've seen there. One of them is strategy, that engagement and the development of managers is aligned with what the organization is really trying to get done overall, that there's alignment with the organization's overall objectives. And so I think leadership needs to see how it fits into the bigger picture. And ideally, leadership is a part of setting that tone of the bigger picture, and how engagement's right on the same line as profit and all the other things that the organization is trying to achieve, because it's part of the organization's values and what they believe is important. Second, I think communication is really important. We've seen that in high growth organizations, that they just communicate effectively what the purpose is behind it. So I think that notion of purpose and also accountability we've been talking about, holding managers accountable over time, is important to growth. But in terms of convincing, I think your question is about convincing leadership. I think they need to see the purpose beyond, in most cases, the performance data will help them see the purpose directly. But in many cases, they need to see how engagement can actually change. One of the things I've observed in organizations over time is that in many of them who are using an engagement program that doesn't have good education around it, good training, a good feedback process around it, that they'll see a flat line, that they'll have a history of having measures in place that have just flatlined over time because they haven't done the right intervention work around it. And so that sometimes will build up an image that it's not that important, or that it's not changeable. There's plenty of evidence around organizations that have improved engagement, that that we can do something about it, and I think we need to put that in front of people as well more often, so they can see what's possible and how that relates to. One example would be we trended engagement when the economy sunk. And we've trended engagement for organizations when the economy has improved. And the outcome we looked at was earnings per share. And we found that during a down economy, organizations that had high levels of engagement held their own basically while their competition shrunk or declined. So it's about holding your own during a down economy. Anytime the economy sinks, there's a fight or flight kind of response that can happen, or people can think of the opportunity in the future. And so engaged organizations just hold their own in a down economy, but then in a flourishing economy, they surpass their competition significantly. So I hope that answered your question, but I'm glad to follow up with more.
Sure. We also have a couple of questions from Keith and Trish asking about how strengths relates to employee engagement. And so I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. But do the most highly effective managers explicitly use their top 5 in Clifton Strengths Finder? And if so, does it tend to be ingrained in the company? And then also, do good managers tend to have certain strengths more than others that make them a good manager?
Yeah, good questions. Yeah, the most effective managers, and I use the word efficiency again, the more efficient managers are using their own strengths. They recognize what their strengths are, they're aware of them, they're applying them, and getting partners to help them if in ways that they don't have strengths. So knowing yourself is really critical to develop and really critical to improving employee engagement. From a selection perspective, yes, there are talents that predict, our innate capacity for excellence that predict whether we can be successful in the role of management. We're all on a continuum on those talents. These are talents that are a bit more specific to the role of management than what you would get. For those of you familiar with our Strengths Finder instrument, they're more specific to the role of management than what you would get with Strengths Finder. Strengths Finder is developed for the broad populace, so it'll give you language around who you are as a person, how you do your work. There are other assessments that we've developed. One very recently that we've just spent a lot of effort putting together looks at the innate managerial talents of individuals, their level of motivation and influence, and their ability to build relationships, their ability to make decisions, to make tough decisions and still make people feel good about them. Some of these characteristics are, and the ones I just listed, are innate. So they're more likely to be something that you can select for in the first place when you're promoting someone or bringing someone into the organization in that managerial role. So I wouldn't recommend using StrengthsFinder for that because it's a broader instrument designed to understand how people do their work. A managerial talent assessment is designed to help organizations understand whether the individual can do that work. Now, knowing that people have been promoted into management for a variety of reasons historically, those that are in managerial roles, we encourage to use a StrengthsFinder approach to get to know who they are as an individual so they can leverage who they are and partner with the right people and partner with their team effectively to get done the objectives the organization needs to get done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Just time, I think, here for maybe one or two more, but a guest in our chat room asks that many times, especially in a down economy, an organization is challenged in the amount of resources it can put on products or different projects. While the organization and the individuals within that organization may have clarity on what's expected of them at work, the organization isn't able to provide all the resources that are desired or needed to work on that project. Which doesn't necessarily mean that they're insufficient, but how would the response of question 2 be interpreted or moderated in those types of cases?
Well, I think there are some real issues about, I mean, when we looked at as the economy dropped in the 2008 kind of time frame, we saw some drops in in aggregate in a few of the employee engagement elements, particularly knowing what's expected dropped a little bit, and opportunity to do what I do best dropped a little bit, and the reason for that, interesting, materials and equipment didn't drop that much, but do what I do best did. Those two I just mentioned, though, probably related to some layoffs and people changing their roles and having to reframe what they do in the context of their coworkers a bit during those times. On materials and equipment, in many cases, not in all cases, I know that there are some significant resource issues that organizations need to address that maybe they can't during a down economy. But in many cases that we've studied, that issue is interpreted through a lot of minor kind of adjustments that are made to jobs, just overlooked adjustments, equipment adjustments, materials adjustments that relate to people doing their jobs effectively in a retail environment. It might mean whether somebody has a stapler at the checkout counter that they need. I mean, it can be that simple in many cases. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, though, but there are a lot of, when you look at each job and look at how people interpret that question, there tend to be some things you can check off the list pretty quickly that are just unmet needs related to how people do their work.
One more question here. Patrick from Dallas has noticed that in our member engagement, or our ME25 survey that we use with faith communities, we measure commitment. How does the commitment piece fit into the Q12 questions? Is there, do they work together? Does Q12 measure commitment, or is commitment a separate piece or a separate process that we measure?
Yeah, good question. Think about commitment as an outcome. So it's in terms of measuring people's attitudes, it's more of an outcome. People are committed or they're not committed. And so engagement is a predictor of that and many other states. It's a predictor of whether people are interested. It's a predictor of whether people are committed, whether they're involved, how enthusiastic they are in their work environment. It's a predictor of performance also. So think about engagement as these are some of the antecedents, some of the elements that we can all change and do something about immediately in a work environment to affect performance outcomes. Attitudes like commitment and others like that, even satisfaction, fall under, I classify those as more attitudinal outcomes, or outcomes that are less difficult to change. They're more the result of something else.
Okay. And we have time for just one more question here that just came in guest in the chat room. This person is curious to know what research or results we have with the employee engagement and its relationship to Generation Y in managerial roles and earlier in their career than in past decades. What are engaged organizations doing differently to equip Generation Y managers?
Well, I think that's an area we could do a lot more research in, actually. I'm glad you asked that question. We have studied Gen Y workers in general and what they're looking for, and what I think this research could lead to is informing managers how they work and develop Gen Y workers. Is that one of the things that kind of differentiates them and whether they're likely to stay or leave an organization is whether they feel they have an opportunity to develop and learn and grow in their organization. And so they're thinking about, Gen Yers are thinking about, and we don't know yet if this is generational or is it just age, because generations, technically, you've got to track a cohort for a significant amount of time to know whether it's a true generational effect or is it just the stage in their life, right? And so the chance to grow and progress and to see where your future is in the organization is one of the differentiators for that generation that we've seen in our research. They want to know where they're headed. If they don't see where they're headed, they are more likely to leave.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, Brian. We will remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at q12.gallup.com and send us your question and comments. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this webcast and all past shows over at coaching.gallup.com. On that site, you'll also find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages. Once again, that website is coaching.gallup.com. If you need custom employee engagement solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, please contact us at live@gallup.com. Gallup also offers the High Performance Manager course for managers looking to take the next step in their development as a manager. The course is offered in cities around the world and can be delivered on-site in your organization with 15 or more participating managers. For more information on this course, please email us at live@gallup.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us on September 30th for our next Great Manager webcast. Goodbye.